Hi guys, welcome to another video for OCD Recovery. If you'd like to use our coaching services, please reach out to phil@ocdrecovery.com and he will get back to you as quick as he can. So yeah, I wanted to speak quickly about accepting suffering, right? I know you might be thinking, Elliot, you're doom and gloom. I don't want to hear this today. I'm suffering right now. I've been suffering for a while. I don't want to hear any more doom and gloom. But I think when we have a attitude of acceptance towards our suffering, we were able to develop like a tolerance of our suffering, and we're able to deal with it in a much more of a healthy way when it does inevitably arise, right? So, you know, from the moment we're born to the moment we're going to die, right? Whether we've got OCD, whether we've got depression, whether we've got fibromyalgia, whether we've got cystic fibrosis, whether we've got cancer, whether we're just a normal human being, right, who's got nothing wrong with them per se, but you know, throughout the course of a lifetime, we are going to suffer, right? There is never going to be somebody who's lived an entire life from the age of, you know, being 0 to when they're born to the age of 90 when they die. No one is going to go through life without having suffered in any way. You know, that's just the reality of it. We have, from our perspective, we have OCD, right? And that is just a fact of life. We think that because it's so bad, because it's so uncomfortable, because it's like so detrimental to us, we think that we absolutely should not experience this. But, you know, unfortunately, we're not exempt from that. People without OCD, they're not exempt from their suffering, right? I know people that have lived with Crohn's disease their whole life. I know someone who had cancer and died at the age of 26. I know somebody who had Huntington's disease. They was diagnosed with it at the age of about 28, which is a sort of a genetic brain disease, and they ended up dying at the age of 40. I know somebody that's had a baby that they didn't want to have, and now their life is completely changed. I'm not saying that having a baby is suffering, by the way, but I'm just saying, you know, all the difficulties that come with that. You know, the late nights, you know, the financing of it, etc. I'm not saying it's bad, but you know, there's difficult elements to that, especially if you don't want to have the baby. I know somebody who has irritable bowel syndrome. I know somebody who recently got let go from their job that they've been at for 5 years and they really enjoyed it. I know somebody who just broke up from their partner after 8 or 9 years and now they're in a really, really bad place. So throughout life, there is going to be suffering. It's unavoidable. And there's going to be different levels of suffering, right? So there's going to be sort of little levels of suffering. For example, you know, your dishwasher's not working. In my instance, I was out driving the other day and my car broke down and I had to like pull over and get the call outs to come out and help me. Yes, it's a bit of a nightmare and, you know, a massive inconvenience. I was meant to go and meet some friends after and I wasn't able to do that, which was very annoying. But yeah, there you go, suffering. So you get those little trivial sufferings that you just, you know, that are very irritating. And then obviously as well, you get the big suffering. So, you know, like, I don't know, losing a job or your health deteriorating or losing a loved one, you know. So there's all these different levels of suffering that is going to happen throughout a lifetime, right? And these things are unavoidable, right? So how can we look at that from an OCD perspective? Well, the fact of the matter is that we have OCD, right? And that, you know, that means that at times we're going to suffer, you know. That's just unfortunately the way it is. However, having said that, when you accept that you're going to suffer, right, and that there are going to be difficulties along the way, you know, you might just be right at the start of your recovery journey. And, you know, I think when you have that attitude and acceptance and tolerance towards the fact that you're going to suffer, then that actually takes out some of the resistance towards that suffering, and it actually in many ways it stops you or reduces your anxiety about your anxiety, you know, your depression about your depression, your panic about your panic. It takes off another layer of that suffering when you just have that acceptance and tolerance towards it, right? It would obviously be really, really great if we had a completely suffering free life, right? But, you know, as I've said before, there's other people who don't have OCD who do actually suffer, and actually suffer in actually probably worse ways than what some of us have suffered, right? You know, you look at Viktor Frankl in the book Man's Search for Meaning. He was like tortured for years in an Auschwitz death camp with no food, no water. He was skin and bone. All his family had died. He had typhus and frostbite. He was getting beaten every morning. He was working out in -20-degree temperatures, you know, working on the railway tracks out in Auschwitz in Poland. And he didn't know whether he was going to die. His colleagues around him were dying. You know, there's people getting used to scientific experiments, you know, an immeasurable amount of suffering, right? So, you know, I know that when you're so consumed in your battle with OCD that you think that you're the only one suffering, but there's also other people who suffer in life as well. And I guess in many ways it sort of makes you appreciate that you're like not the only one who's not going through immense hardship, right? And I think when you look at it like that, it sort of takes out the why me factor. You know, we're just a human being living on this rock in outer space at this time, and you know, to say that we shouldn't suffer and that we should not experience that is very irrational, because you know, there's no reason why we shouldn't suffer, unfortunately. And you know, I know it might sound like doom and gloom, but when I had this attitude towards accepting suffering, it really helped me. There's a book called The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, and he does this with a guy called Howard Cutler. And it's a book, it's not on the reading list, but it's a book that I found very, very beneficial. He basically just alluded to the fact how, like I've just said there, like suffering is an inescapable fact of life. And that when you're able to actually, you know, recognize that, you're able to deal with suffering when it inevitably arises, right? And also as well, when you accept that suffering is going to happen, it sort of makes you stop wanting to change it so bad. And that's a massive thing. Like in OCD, we're really trying to change our internal state from A to B. For example, we're anxious or we're panicked or we're depressed, and we're trying to become unanxious or undepressed or unpanicked. And that's not really what you want to be doing with OCD. You know, when you're trying to change your internal state, you're not accepting your worst case scenario, and you're being really rigid and irrational and not flexible because you're demanding that you absolutely should not experience this. So when you naturally just say, look, hey, I'm probably going to suffer for the time being, right? Maybe if I'm at the start of my journey, I'm probably going to suffer for the next 2 years, right? When you do that, it's not only realistic, it just, as I said before, it just helps to take off that additional layer of suffering that you're pounding on yourself, that you're compounding on yourself because you're saying that you shouldn't experience that, right? So yeah, I think this is really, really key. It really, really helped me just to acknowledge that the fact that, you know, just being a human with OCD, we're liable to suffer, and we probably are going to like suffer for the time being. However, having said that, you know, it's okay to feel this way. You know, it's okay to have OCD. It's okay to feel the way that you do. Like, given the circumstances, it's understandable. And, you know, given all the right support and resources around you, you can make massive strides in your recovery. So, yeah, I think just having a rational perspective towards suffering and like that sort of thing will really, really help you to, you know, alleviate your OCD, you know, not become anxious about being anxious, and just gradually just bringing your mind and nervous system back to a state of calm, obviously whilst you work on your irrational beliefs and your avoidance behaviour, compulsions, exposure, and everything else that goes into OCD. All right, so yeah, thanks for this, guys, and I will see you on the next video.